The crisis of identity begins here. We have a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. That's where we are. And all the amazing stuff, all of the exceptional stuff, everything that's optimally true, beautiful, and good is over there. It's in a different pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. A pattern with more integrity, more integration, a pattern with a higher level of intelligence, meaning a pattern that converts energy more efficiently to sustainable well-being. That's over there. And we're here. And the crisis of identity is this transition. How do we go from one to the other? And what I want to look at is the resistance factor. We're an identity away from living in heaven, meaning heaven is the mythological representation of sustainable well-being. Hell is the mythological representation of chronic, unnecessary, and extreme suffering. We all want heaven. And to some extent, we're all in hell. Now, how do we move and what's stopping us? Because the outer reality that we want is generated by our pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, which means that our biggest resource and our biggest enemy is ourself, but not just any self. It is the I that identifies with the current pattern. It is the I that is attached to the current pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. That is generating the current reality that is somewhere on the continuum from heaven and hell. So why don't we just figure out and adopt a better pattern, a better diet of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, a better practice of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being? Why don't we just do it, right? Well, in the gap between one pattern and another lies the abyss. And the abyss is much greater. It's much bigger than either pattern. Any pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being collapses out of the possibility field into the probability field and into actuality. That's its journey. But what lies between those two positions in evolution is infinity. Now, one way we can see this is in the hands of a clock, right? We take a unit of time. In the paradigm of time on the abstract continuum, and it looks like we have to, where do we have to go here? We take a unit of time, right? A second. The time moves from 1 second to the next second, a unit of time. But we have this structure, we have this structure. We've made the transition from 1 unit to the next unit, 1 second, 2 seconds. But we can cut the second in half, and now we have half a second. We can cut that in half, now we have a quarter second. We can cut that in half. We have 1/8 of a second. And we can keep doing this infinitely, meaning there is no end in sight to the smallest divisible unit of anything. We can do it with space. We can do it with time. We can do it with color. We can take the color wheel and refract it into 256 million colors, and we're just getting started. And that's with a second. But what about eternity? How many times can you cut eternity into pieces? Because a second can be measured, but the space between cannot. So we have to move, as we move from one pattern, that's just a repeating cycle, by the way, which is nested within other cycles. If we look closely at reality, we see that subatomic particles are moving in a sequence, in a cycle, inside atomic particles, which are moving in a cycle. And those cycles just get bigger and bigger and bigger. We could call a solar system a macro representation of an atomic system. Just these small particles rotating around one another. At core, the multiverse is a nested hierarchy which has no meaning in multidimensional space. It's a nested series of circles within circles within circles, of cycles within cycles within cycles. The Earth going around the sun, the tides, the sleep and waking cycle, the in-breath and the out-breath. The in-breath and the out-breath is a cycle, is a circle. And everything that we know of in reality is a pattern of cycles and circles in relationship with other patterns of cycles and circles, including identity. The identity is the I that attaches to the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. And the witness is the self that watches the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, that the I identifies with. And the basis, the entire basis of identification with a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being is repetition. You look in a mirror, and what the I compares in saying, is this me or not? What the I compares is, I had that kind of nose yesterday. Do I still have it today? If I do, that's me. That's it. If I do, that's me. Does my voice still sound like that the way it sounded yesterday? If it does, that's my voice. Why? Because it's a stable pattern. Because there's a continuity in the cycle. Is this still the Earth? Well, we take a few cues, right? Are the countries, is this the name of this country? Does the map still? Okay, it still is the same Earth. We use a few reference points to establish that it's the same pattern. And when we've done that, we identify with it. And so we have the identity. Now, the trouble and the blessing of a pattern is that all patterns within a given ecology, within a given environment, have an intelligence quotient, are on the intelligence continuum. Because up here, as we get towards the ideal, we consume very little time, money, and natural resources to create very high yields of multidimensional, sustainable well-being for ourselves and everyone around us, right? It's actually not fun when you're in bliss and in joy. It's not fun when that joy is sincere, to see a child crying, to see someone depressed. It's not as fun as to see the people around us sharing the moment of joy, right? The highest point of fun is to be around other people who are also having fun, is to be in an ecology that is also having fun. You know, seeing pelicans with plastic beer hangers around their neck and drips of oil limping. It's not fun if you are in a state of peace and beauty yourself. Now, if you're feeling miserable, if you're feeling helpless, if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling frustrated and powerless, it is fun to see other people and other things suffering. Why? Because it means that I'm not alone. Loneliness isn't as fun as connecting, as a shared experience. And if I cannot lift my identity, my pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being into a place of sustainable abundance and sustainable well-being, if I lack the competence to do that, if I lack the resources, the power to sustain that state, and I'm all alone, I'm the only one suffering, and nobody cares, there's nothing I can do about it, it becomes fun to watch other people suffering. Because the suffering isn't going up, but the bonding is. The need for love and belonging to be one with the same pattern. You belong here. It means you're welcome into the identity, the pattern of that circle. So that's where we're headed on the intelligence continuum. We're headed from hell, which is consuming vast quantities of time, money, and natural resources to create chronic, excruciating levels of pain and suffering for ourselves, those around us, and our ecology. That's hell. And where we're headed is consuming very little amounts of time, money, and natural resources to create very high levels of sustainable, multidimensional well-being. The social dimension is a dimension of well-being. The physical dimension is a dimension of well-being. So when you have well-being financially, physically, sexually, socially, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, that's multidimensional well-being. And it takes a higher level of intelligence to do that than it does to create chronic, unnecessary suffering. And it takes a higher level of intelligence to do multidimensional well-being than it does to do one-dimensional well-being. Because when you can only juggle one plate, when you can only spin one plate, you start to focus on the one plate and the other one crashes, right? That's a competence continuum. I can make it work at work. If I ignore my family, if I ignore my sex life, if I just work 60 hours a week and put all my creativity and attention in getting my work done, then I can have some well-being at work. And by that point, my wife wants to divorce me, my kids hate me, my body's falling apart, my this and that. I have to start taking stimulants to kind of keep. Okay, that's it. The work's going well. I've got to repair my marriage, right? Now I'm going to go over here, and it's like if I work, just sit outside my wife's door, begging her to talk to me. I'm not going to leave for work. I'm not going to answer the phone. Just talk to me. We get through 3 hours of that, and then we do this, and then we do that, and we get through all these layers of misunderstanding, and I do this, and I do this, and I do this, and then, after 3 weeks of repair and therapies and we go on a family vacation, we start to feel the vibe again, and then the family is great, and we're broke, right? So that's it's competency on the continuum. Like the worst case scenario is we're spending massive amounts of time, money, and natural resources to create chronic and unnecessary suffering through multidimensional failure, multidimensional disease. My marriage isn't working, my job isn't working, I have no sex life, my body feels terrible, everything's going wrong. So that's low-level competency. And I'm working really, 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 really hard just to hang on to a reality in which everything is shit, right? It's just, ugh. So that's the low level. We want to get to the high level. Now, we have to go through the abyss. Now, the greatest change, the highest jump in intelligence and well-being is a completely different shape, right? You can get incremental change. You take this thought and you say it's just a little bit rough around the edges. Let's make it a little slightly more symmetrical. It's a little bit more symmetrical than it was before, right? The peaks and the valleys are staying a little bit more of a controlled band. So we've made an incremental improvement to the pattern of thinking. Okay. But when you change your thinking too much, I believe materialism is bad. Let's be a Buddhist. If you change your thinking too much, it becomes asynchronous. It diverges from the pattern of feeling. So the pattern of feeling has to change. And then if you change that, the pattern of doing has to change. If you're doing and thinking and feeling, you should speak differently. You should speak about what you're actually thinking. And then you may want to move or adjust friendships or change work. And somewhere in the midst of this, we encounter the void. Now we can see that the void is the infinite, right? Because there's not an infinite number of seconds in the day, but there is an infinite number of spaces between seconds. And there's an infinite number of spaces that can be delineated between 1 foot. Between this identity and this identity, there is an infinite gradient. Mentally, emotionally, physically, sexually, financially, spiritually, socially, there is an infinite gradient as we move from one pattern to the other. And we can get lost in that because those infinite delineations do not have language. The vocabulary isn't big enough. And just to kind of pause on that note a little bit, what we do is we take the one, we take the circle, we take the original sphere, the unconscious one, we cut it in two. It's called polarity. We cut it in two again. It's called language. We cut it into pieces and we cut it into bits, and then we ascribe symbolic representations to each of the bits that we've cut. We say, this is a hand, and this is a shoe, and this is a hat. And so having cut the one into tens of thousands of pieces, we cut it into time increments, we cut it into space increments, we cut it into color increments. This is red and this is orange. Why? Because that's what we said, right? It's all made up. But having done that, having cut the world into pieces, into a grid, in space we use a longitude and latitude, type of dynamic so that we can locate ourselves on a grid. Now we can get from this point here over to this point here, referencing the grid. But what about this point, right? What about the points that have no name? Those are the infinite points. Meaning, and those infinite dots that are in between, the spaces between sound. See, most of the world is space. Most of reality. Take the distance between a proton and an electron, these rotating things in an atom. 99% space. You take the organism of a solar system, and you take this bit of mass and this bit of mass, the sun and the earth and Mars and stuff. But if you measure the space that is between those dots, 99% space. You see, and it's rather hard to calculate unnamed space. So it takes us into the unconscious. 99.9% of all that is unnamed, is unmapped, is unknown, is unconscious. It's just the way reality is. Now, what that means is that when we move our identity, our pattern of thinking and feeling, speaking, doing, and being from here to here, we are passing through the unknown. We are passing through the unnamed. We are out of control. You cannot rationally control something you have no name for. So, we have to trust something. We have to perhaps, and you see, not every one of the identities that are at peak levels of intelligence, not every one of the identities are clear. This we look at this, and that's been pretty clear. It's a set of circles and circles and circles, and relatively, we get the idea if those were perfectly drawn, they would be symmetrical. The spaces are like that. That looks clearly more efficient. If you had to choose between a car tire that was shaped like this or a car tire that was shaped like this, you'd pick this one because round things, symmetrical things and round things, spherical things, are more efficient, less bumpy than asymmetrical, discordant, bumpy shapes, right? So this is definitely smoother sailing. So if you're trying to decide which tire to use for a car, go with this one. But how do you get, how does this energy delete and become this energy? You see, because physicists understand that nothing at a core energetic level is created or destroyed. Rather, what we call birth and death is a transformation. Trans, as in transit, form, transiting the form from one shape to another shape. And that the same energy, for example, if we move our pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being to this shape, there's a new form for the I to identify with. Now we are the one who thinks this, feels this, and does this, and we are no longer the one that did this, right? Now, so we have to embrace change. We have to embrace chaos. We have to trust that on the other side of the transition, we have to trust that it's better. Meaning, we spend less energy to create higher yields of sustainable well-being. We've got to do that, or we can't move. We won't move. Why would anyone say, I wait 10 minutes in line at this bank, I pay 5% interest on my loan, I get these identical features, so I'm going to go through the hassle, the trust, the learning curve of moving over to this bank where I will stand in line for an hour every time, and I'll pay double, 10% on my loan, and the other features are the same, other than I'll have to learn a new app, right? Why would you do that? Unless you're a fool, right? A fool would do that, or might not do that, randomly. But that's why it's the intelligence continuum. You measure the intelligence of an identity based on the efficiency, the conversion rate of energy into sustainable, multidimensional well-being. So we all want the same thing. We all want to feel good. We don't want to feel bad. And the primary technology for that is identity, meaning our thoughts, our feelings. That's 2/3 of reality, by the way. If you're thinking I'm a shit, that's 1/3 of your reality. And if I'm feeling shame and inadequate, that's another 1/3 of reality. And if my body responds to that thought and feeling that's the other 1/3 of reality. My heart, mind, and body, 3 segments of our conscious experience, are all not at a very high level, right? So, to create sustainable high levels of well-being, we need to transform our identity from one to the other in a way that continues to go up over time, right? Cocaine does a wonderful job of a short-term wave, right? And here we get into short and long-term intelligence, right? Short and long-term well-being. Can buy a little cocaine, gives me a hit for an hour, this amount, but then I've got an expense and it crashes. I can go jogging. Doesn't go up as high, but it lasts longer. So you've got a shape like that. I can invest in a 10-year investment that very, very, very slowly keeps going up, or I can invest in a tchotchke that is worth less the moment I buy it and gives 2 hours of adrenaline, right? And so these are cycles. What's the cycle? You want to do some things that make you feel good right now. You want to do some things that make you feel good in an hour. You want to do some things that make you feel good next week. And you want to do some things that make you feel good on your deathbed. And those are nested patterns. And one of the tensions in those nested patterns is that many of the things that will make you feel the best right now, cocaine, amphetamines, etc., the best right now, make you feel the worst in 10 years. And many of the things that make you feel the worst right now make you feel great in 10 years. Thinking more, going for a run, starting a disciplined protocol. I don't want to do it. I want another scoop of ice cream. But 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, where you are in sustainable well-being relative to where you were, it's very different. And so, given the goal, sustainable well-being, we need to plant some energy that makes us feel good now. We need to plant some other energy as seeds. We invest, make us feel good in an hour, and we just keep going up. It's going off the screen here, but we need to keep going up and do some things that'll feel great in 100 years. You see, and the ultimate cultural expression of that is some of our Native American ancestors who did things today in the understanding of the blessings that these things bestowed on their people 7 generations in the future. Right? That's another way of looking at Stephen Covey's quadrant of very important and not at all urgent activities, rather than very urgent and very unimportant. Importance, meaning, always correlates to well-being. That which creates the most amount of sustainable well-being over time has the most meaning over time. That which creates the most amount of chronic and unnecessary hell has the most meaning. In that case, the meaning to stop it, right? You learn, given the goal, given the guidance system within life and biology, you learn when you're getting off course, when everything you do makes it worse. You eventually get to such a hellish point that you stop doing it, eventually, or you die, right? Pretty hellish, And eventually, if the things that you're doing that create the most amount of sustainable well-being, and that's going up, right? Well, that has more and more meaning as that touches you and then your family and then your community and then your culture and then your species, and it keeps creating more sustainable well-being. You learn from that guidance system in biology that you're on the right track. You're behaving consistent with life's plan. And what has life been in the business of doing ever since the Big Bang? Getting bigger, lasting longer, becoming more complex, developing sustainable relationships between all of those things, creating synergy, and ultimately the expression of human consciousness, which, if it is to continue, must get bigger, more complex, last longer, and have more sustainable relationships with itself and with its host body, with the larger ecology out of which it emerges, right? And so that's what life is about. And the choice that we all get to make is whether to be a part of life or whether to commit suicide. Right? Because when life is getting bigger and life is getting more complex and life is getting more efficient and life is becoming more sustainable, Now, you never have to doubt the sustainability of life. You may have to doubt the sustainability of your life and your family, but you never have to doubt the sustainability of life. There are more than 1 trillion planets estimated to be capable of some form of life by our very narrow definitions. And we're just getting started. You see, over the next 1 trillion years, over the next 10 billion years, we've only been around 1 billion, you and I, as a species, that was kind of somewhat recognizable. But over the next 10 billion years, life's going places. On this planet, on that planet, on this planet, on this planet. You see, life doesn't stop just because we blow it up in a nuclear holocaust. It just gets right back to a new iteration because time is on life's side. Give it 1 trillion years, and you will see the most amazing things that you can possibly imagine. And going back to physics, nothing's created or destroyed. Energy in one form transforms to another form that is more intelligent than the old form. And if that doesn't make it, as most forms don't, it is consumed. It transforms again into an even more intelligent form. Now, we look at this through the eyes that we look at it through. But looking at it objectively, if you understand that all things are connected, and you see what life is about, when a carrot transforms into a human being and experiences that energy flows through the matrix of the field that organizes human energy. Is it evolution? Does the carrot feel, oh shit, I was enjoying sitting in the ground, this and that and the other, and now I'm part of a human being? So we project things onto that. I don't want to be eaten by a giant thing. But what would it be like to have our consciousness diffused into a field that was vastly more complex, more intricate, more sustainable than our own? We don't know. But what do we have to face to transform identity? Number one, we have to face the unknown. Number two, we have to face the void, the 99.9% between two forms that is space. We have to face chaos, and we have to face being out of control. We have to face the unpredictability of change, because all change has unintended consequences. And some of those consequences we think of are good, and some of those consequences we think of are bad. We saw another apartment across town. We could save $10 a month on rent, and the view was a little better, and it was closer to our favorite restaurant. So we start to move our things over and we fall down the stairs. We wouldn't have fallen down the stairs if we hadn't changed apartment and been carrying that heavy load. So then, is the net effect better? Right? Well, the apartment may be better, but the unintended consequence, is that better or worse? There's an element that we call chance that is really the predictable outcome that is far too complex to calculate, because there's a probability field around everything. If you take our body type and our mind type, like if we're paying attention to everything that we're doing, that's a different mind probability field around falling than if we're grumbling about Aunt Sylvia. You see, the probability field of falling down the stairs with a heavy object with irregular stairs with a mind that grumbles about Aunt Sylvia is a different probability field than the mind that focuses on the here and now in every movement. Right? So we all have probability fields that are spreading out in front of us all the time. And every single variable, what we eat that day, what we think that day, what we say that day, what we do that day, every single variable changes the probability field. And then at the last moment, all of those probabilities collapse into one actuality. And is that actuality going to have a net effect in the short run, which is different than the long run? You see, a couple of years ago, my landlord started becoming abusive. And I was furious because, it fit into a classic, pattern of tenant harassment. I hadn't done anything wrong. Why is he trying to get rid of me? I'm not going to be harassed, and da-da-da. And it was a huge failure. It was a huge failure when his harassment reached a level that I realized there was no way to win, meaning you could stay and be harassed, but it had escalated to a point where to stay was as bad as to go in the short term because the harassment was at this frequency and the hassle of moving was at that frequency. And so it's like, so I moved. And the rent went up. The moving was a hassle and expensive. So a big short-term cost. But from the moment of the move, in a better, healthier environment, a nicer neighborhood, nicer neighbors, better parking, more spacious thought, a film studio that wouldn't have existed in the smaller space, a different identity, a different pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being emerged, that every day I was in this house, things got better. And because of that state of well-being, because of what emerged out of that, business took off, and I had the most profitable year in 25 years, the year of the move, just from the profits in the last part of the year, from being in a different space. So my failure to hang on to the old pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, my failure became one of my bigger successes because the next year, income doubled again. More well-being for the family. So, but I didn't know what would happen. I was afraid of the law of unintended consequences. What if this and this and this happens? What if it all falls apart? What if this leads to this and this leads to this? I don't want to change. I don't want to change because there's so much in the unknown. Now, everything that I've talked about, the unknown, being out of control, uncertainty, chaos, the void, all of this has a very strong correlation to trauma, PTSD, and core decisions early in childhood around abuse, around bullying, around abuses of power, around hypocrisy, because the more we are abused, the more we are traumatized, the more we are violated, the more we are treated sociopathically as an infant, as a child, as an adolescent, the more we dislike it. And the worst possible state is to be helpless, small, alone, traumatized, i.e. terrified and in pain that we're not in control of that pain, and we can't say when it's going to stop. So it feels like a timeless pain, a timeless terror. And in that moment, we make a decision. Everyone does. I never want to feel this way again. Nobody does. But with that comes a strategy, a series of sub-choices. And one of the very common sub-choices that we make is I'm never going to be out of control again. I'm never going to let another human being have that power over me. You know, that was one of the things that was so upsetting about this landlord. Paid rent on time for 14 years, increased the rent however many times, did repairs, did this and that and the other. But so surely I don't get abused, right? But that's not a guarantee about other people's behavior in a given situation. And so, you know, that it was incredibly stressful to acknowledge that people have the ability to hurt one another for no particular reason. You know, and how to resolve that. And I can't stop it. What if that happens with the next person? What if this happens? Like, this is a real crisis. And that has to be faced. The unknown, being out of control, the void, chaos, the law of unintended consequences. So I did the best I could. I picked the place my wife liked the most. I very carefully read the legal agreement. I made numerous changes to the legal agreement. And it worked out beautifully, right? So it was the fear of change, though, that made that an involuntary move. I would never have moved without that pressure, because in the back of my mind was always, I don't know if it'll be better. What I do know is I can't control everything. And it'll be more expensive for sure. It's $15,000 just to move a lot of things, you know, and you have to take time off work, you have to pay extra costs here. It's definitely going to be expensive to move. But is it going to be better? I don't know. I don't know. And the more frightened we are of being out of control, the more frightened we are of change. The more frightened we are of being out of control and of changing, the more we resist the beautiful world, the beautiful possibility that is out of our control, right? The best things require a certain amount of luck, a certain amount of cooperation, partnership with other people, and we never have total control over those dynamics. But we have to go through that. Now, the other thing that we encounter is when we change identity, is the fear of losing who we are. How will I know who I am? I've been a Republican this and this and this and this and this for my whole life. And if I just suddenly become like this, how will I how will I recognize myself? If that could happen, what if every day I'm a new personality, or what's this, or this is who I am. So the I, the ego, the I that identifies, that attaches to the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, wants to stay the same, wants to stay familiar. Now, there's one other crisis that we need to face as we move from one identity to another identity, and that's ego overload. And here's what I mean. If I delete this and add this, I've got a mess, right? Because this was vaguely congruent. You've got basically horizontal things. They're all moving from left to right. They're not terribly sane in terms of they're not all, neatly aligned up as one, the same length and all that. It's not perfectly integrated, but it is generally congruent. We've got horizontal, left to right movement patterns that are going in the general direction of one another, and they're familiar. And so even though it's a bit crazy, I don't really know why I do this. I know that I do it, and I know that nothing particularly bad happens. I don't know why my leg twitches like this. I do. I recognize it. That's me, and it's okay. But if you change just the thought, like, how do you change an identity, a whole pattern? Because the thing that makes you sane is coherence, right? It's not what you're thinking that makes you sane. It's the integration of what you're thinking with what you're feeling, what you're doing, what you're saying. If I say I'm a Republican, and I vote Democratic, and I talk about Democratic policies, and I spend time with Democrats, and I donate to the Democratic campaign, I'm crazy, right? And particularly if I don't understand that. If I don't understand that that's actually the opposite, then people would say that's crazy. Crazy just means divergence, a lack of integrity, a lack of integration. If I say this and think this and want this and then do the opposite, I'm crazy. I'm not integrated, right? And so even when you can think of this as the upgrading car problem, even when a Tesla Model S Plaid is better for the environment and for an investment and this and that than a Toyota Corolla diesel. It's better for the environment. It's quieter. I want a Tesla. If you try and take off the windows of the Tesla and then take off your windows and then put the Tesla window on your Corolla, it gets worse. And so how do you get, when it's you're talking about, how do you when you're selling a used car, you don't assemble it piece by piece and, who wants a windshield wiper for a Corolla? Here, okay, sold for $10. Okay, now I want a windshield wiper for a Tesla Plaid and put on, it doesn't fit. The windshield wiper is different, right? When you're changing identity and you do it incrementally, the pieces that will most fit with your ideal do not fit with the current model, with you. They seem crazy because they are. Patterns relate to one another and relate to things over time. So even though heaven awaits over here, and all we have to do is change our thoughts, our feelings, our actions, our words, and our way of being. That's all we have to change. And a whole new world that's 1,000% more beautiful, true, and good, 1,000% more intelligent. It creates more well-being with less energy. We feel better, sustainably. And so do the people around us. They're grateful we've made the change. Not our old friends necessarily, because you've ruined their pattern. If they identify with behaving treating you like this, and now you're like this, now they seem crazy. So they may get rid of you, right? Because you're not fitting. The windshield wiper doesn't fit the new model. But other people are like, oh, thank goodness. Thank goodness. It's so nice. Of course I'd like to drive with you. You're in a quieter, faster, safer, more ecological car, right? You're in a new identity. So the transition doesn't work very well if you do it piece by piece. But there's this thing called RAM. Now, the primary purpose of identity is an autopilot for 90% of life. We have a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that we've developed over time based on what worked over time to relate to life. So we don't wake up every morning and consider diet from scratch. We rely on diets that we've done before. Maybe it's as simple as mom ate this diet, mom fed me this diet, and I've eaten it for the rest of my life. I never questioned the pattern. All evolution, by the way, is sympathy, unquestioned innocence and acceptance, antipathy, violent rejection, rebellion, and then synthesis, making a new pattern consciously on our own. But every area of identity we don't question. We're just doing it because that's what they did in our family, and that's it. There's no critical analysis at all. There's no synthesis, there's no evolution, there's no consciousness. That's what we did, so that's what I do, and that's why I do it. It's that simple. But if we do want to make a change where we delete all of this, and we take this vision of an identity and we replicate it, generally speaking over here, and now we're this. Well, this is a complete change of our identity. We now have a new pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. But we come into a very core belief, and it's one of the most important questions. It was said to have been asked by Einstein. Other evidence says that it wasn't. But the question is this: is the universe a friendly place? And if you understand that you are a fractal representation of the universe, that your pattern of existence is nested within the general pattern of existence, another way of asking this is, are you basically a good person? Do you basically like yourself? Are you basically trustworthy? Are you okay? Now, if you are, then the integrated corollary, the integrity with that thing, since you are a fractal representation of the whole, then the universe is basically good, basically okay as well. Now, when we are traumatized, when we are violated, every child blames themselves. Their sanity is formed. Bad things are happening to me, but it feels crazy, right? Wait a minute. Bad things are happening to me, but I am a good person. Bad things are happening to me, but I am a good person. This doesn't make sense. It seems crazy. It's overwhelming. What do I do with this? Bad things are happening, but I'm a good person. And what most children do is they say, bad things are happening to me. I am a bad person. And now they've got sanity. They've got integrity. And they would predict, because then I'm a bad person, bad things will continue to happen. Because I'm a bad person, right? And they line up. You know, you've got an integrated, nested pattern. Well, if I'm a bad person and bad things are happening to me, then the universe is bad. Because, first of all, I am a product of the universe. And second of all, the universe is giving me bad things. If this forms as a foundational pattern around which other patterns are built, you have to then say, okay, I am a bad person. Bad things are happening to me. That's who I am, bad. So bad things will continue to happen to me. Now, I don't want bad things to happen to me, and so I'm going to try and control the world in order to stop more bad things happening to me. So that makes sense. It lines up very well. But now you're trying to control and see, when's the next bad thing going to happen? How can I stop it from happening? Because I don't, even though it lines up, it's a nice pattern, lines up together. I don't actually want bad things to happen to me. I want to feel better. I want to escape them. Now, if I believe that I'm bad, I'm going to feel like an imposter. I should be punished because I believe that bad people should be punished, and that's why bad things have been happening to me, but I don't actually want to be punished. So even though I think I should be punished, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to escape the punishment. And then I'm going to hide, because if people find out that I should have been punished, but I wasn't, that I escaped it, then they're going to give me extra punishment for the crime of escaping my punishment. And so I'm going to hide and do this. And so you get all kinds of evasive behavior, and you get people panicking when they're seen clearly. Don't look over here. Don't get too close to me. Get away. You know, it's like, I don't want you to see that I've escaped punishment. Or I don't want you to see that I'm bad and deserve more punishment. Just don't look over there, right? So now you've got an obfuscation protocol. And so you don't want to lose control. You don't want to trust the universe, the one that's made you into a bad person, that is a bad universe, that brings bad things to your life. Why would you trust that, right? Why would you? You don't want that. And when you do a major change, when you change your identity, you're exposing yourself to the unknown, to the void, to the universe, to all that is. And it creates enormous panic and resistance. Of course I want to change, but I don't want to give up control. I don't want to do anything new. I want the world to change, but I don't want to change in a way that would change my world because of the fear of the unknown, the distrust of all that is, right? So that's a gravitational pull to the past. That's a fear that says, I don't want to diverge. Then there's also the fear of chaos, when being out of control, which comes when you do something you don't normally do and other people comment on it and you realize you're changing. Very often, even though the change is constructive, healthy, and positive, the very fact that people are noticing that you're changing freaks you out, and you go back and do the thing you've always done before. So that is a fear-based resistance to evolution. But there is still the RAM question. The reason why most of what we do is unconscious, is default mode arena in the brain, is this: we don't have enough RAM to liquidly and lucidly recombine everything and all that we are into a new shape that makes sense. We can't, you know, it's like a computer that can't run and do editing on all the programs and the operating system all at once. It just can't happen. It's got to do it sequentially. It's got to take time. And, you know, you hope when you get an update in your operating system and everything shuts down and it's updating this, you really, really, really hope that somebody didn't put a bug in that design and all your data is lost. You hope that. But there is that fear. There's that uncertainty. And you really hope that when we're talking about not the identity of your computer operating system, but your own operating system. I sure hope I'm thought this through, you know, it's like, because it's taking me into the unknown. But here's this default mode arena of the brain helps us. And like, here's how it's operating right now. I spent an entire month designing this. What do I mean by this? There's a lint remover to remove some hairs from my dog. That's over there. It's always over there. That's an identity. An identity is a pattern that is familiar. There are lights here. The screen is in the exact, this is a screen back here. This is in the exact position that the light here doesn't reflect into the camera. The light here doesn't. That's set. Now this took weeks to set this up. Right below the screen here, but where I can still see, there's a device I can draw on. That had to be researched. So what we're talking about is the construction of an identity, of a pattern. In this case, a pattern of effortless communication on video, visual image effortless communication, right? Now, it's not totally effortless. Why? Well, for one thing, see, my screen goes over to here. When I look here, so I have to be careful to draw within what you can see. So it's not perfect. It doesn't have a complete integrity. What I see and what you see doesn't line up exactly. Even with $5,000 and, you know, a month of fiddling and all of this, it's still not perfect. But this hat is part of that identity. Anytime my hair is unruly, I grab my hat. You know, this is part of that identity as a little bit of visual interest. There's a whole setup. You know, this pen lets me draw on the screen that then goes to here. Now, I haven't given a single bit of thought to that today. Why? Because it would totally overwhelm me. Meaning, if I was trying to give this talk, a talk that I've never given before, while figuring out 30 different film elements, which bulb to use, how much intensity, it's too much. I collapse. Nothing gets done. You know, the microphone up here was carefully chosen, and it's at the right angle to sound reasonable, right? So this is what identity is. It's an unquestioned pattern that was designed at one time that is not thought about. It's like breathing. Thank goodness I'm not designing my breath while I'm talking to you. If I was, oh my gosh, I forgot to breathe. What? Quick, get the body awake again, right? There would be a crisis of overwhelm. So breathing is unconscious. Drawing is unconscious. The English language, completely unconscious. I'm not rehearsing these words. I'm not saying, what's the word for red? That's all identity. That's all a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. The pattern of being. Everything here is rehearsed as a foundation for the one thing that the conscious mind can focus on, which is the topic. You see, there's two decisions that I'm making: the topic and how narrow the topic and how divergent, which determines the length. Meaning I could talk about this topic and make this video 48 hours long. Literally, that'd be very, very, very easy. And it would, in some ways, be more normal because reality is so complex and words are so slow that we'd just be getting started at about 47 hours of video. But so that's one decision I'm making, is topic and breadth. And I obviously err a little bit towards complexity and longer content, partly because that's what gives me a workout, meaning I have to follow those threads and create a more complex field. It also helps me see relationships between different ideas, which are relationships between language. The intersection of different languages come together. Like these little points are where this word, this idea and this idea come together. I get more awareness when I explore those. So how many of those? Do I bring 1x into it and just stick to the topic? Or do I bring, 10 x's and then start seeing how they fit together? That is, the bit that I'm minimally conscious of. So 95% of what's going on here is identity. It's the flow of the pattern. These are the gestures that I do, meaning I'm not doing a lot of these that take up the screen. I could have developed that pattern, but it just didn't seem as good as this pattern, right? So the pattern of gesture, the pattern of the language that is used, the tonal range, the level of volume, the backgrounds, like I have like 7 backgrounds and I'll pick a background. So there was one moment of picking and then I've forgotten about it. I forgot that this was the background because that's not where my attention is. Now what I'm getting at is we have a conscious RAM, which could be seen as the flashlight. And the flashlight is only this big. Meaning if we're driving a car, we are not shining the flashlight on our breath, on our blood circulation, on the movement of muscles, on the idea of up and down, on the English language, on learning stop signs, just randomly choosing the speed limit, learning, trying to see if pressing this button will accelerate the car, or, No. All of that is patterned. The only thing, the one little variable that this flashlight is shining on is this the best way to get to the destination? All the other is routine. Routine is a recurring pattern that we associate with a given issue. That's all we're focused on. This one little bit. The rest is held in the field of the identity of the pattern. That's where it is. And it's there because at one point it worked for somebody. It's the story of the baking tin. Why do you cut off the bits of your ham? Well, because my mother did. And why did you cut it off? Well, my mother did. Why did you cut it off, grandmother? Well, it wouldn't, the ham wouldn't fit in my baking pan. And so I had to always cut off the ham just to roast it, because it wouldn't fit in. But the daughter and the daughter's daughter, they're doing it just because it made sense to somebody sometime. Why are we still going to school and learning this? Because a few hundred years ago, those were skills useful for factory life. They made sense to somebody at one time. So identity continues its trajectory largely unquestioned until a force equal or greater examines it and changes and stops the identity. But we can only do about 5% of that at any moment. We can only change the identity, the pattern, of about 5% at a time. So now we're back to the Corolla and the Tesla problem. if the only thing I can really see clearly is I can change this bit of pattern over here and I can do it to here. That's what I can focus on, get done today. But I don't see how it all fits together, right? What if it doesn't work out? What if I move this over to here and it causes, what if I plug the Toyota Corolla in? I move the charger over for the Tesla to the Toyota, and I plug the Toyota Corolla in, and it smokes. The gas tank explodes because the systems aren't working, right? It's a different pattern. And so these are the challenges. Heaven is an identity away. For most of us, the greatest fear of our entire life is being out of control, risking failure, risking trauma again. And yet, ultimately, life is moving forward. Life will succeed whether we as an individual or as a species or as a planet does or not. Life's got time. Life can make mistakes and more mistakes and still come out winning. Life can try a trillion experiments, and there's always one that works. You see, life's approach is to run. We gamble and we roll 2 dices. And the question, do we get a double 6 or something like that? We didn't get it. So we lost that hand, and we lost that hand. We got one this time, right? You see, life is rolling a trillion dice every minute of every day. And life gets double 6s all the time. The only question, since we're part of life, is are those double 6s happening in this segment of life or somewhere else? You see, but life is a winner regardless. If our genetic lineage dies out because it didn't produce the most fun, the most efficiently, of all the different possibilities out there, well, don't worry. Another genetic line did win that dynamic. Or realized that it was a different game. See, because at low levels of competence, where you have scarcity, the game is survival. The game isn't actually who has the most fun, it's who survives at low levels of scarcity. So you have to win that game before you win the game of security and survival. Then you win the game of love and belonging. Then you win the game of self-esteem. Then you win the game of developing your talents, your strengths. Then you win the game of bringing those abundantly into the world. And then finally you win the game of becoming part of something transcendent, something more beautiful, more ineffable than yourself. And when you win all of those games, your pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being goes on in the evolutionary tree. But if you fail, another pattern always wins. Life always wins. The only question is, will we be part of the winning mix? And to the degree that we have freedom and freedom of choice and influence, to the degree that we have that, is to the degree that we can influence whether we're one of life's double 6s or whether we're a 1 and a 5, right? Because a probability dictates there will be a lot of all of them. 1/6 of all the die casts will be 1s, and 1/6 of all the die casts will be 2s. But to the degree that we have influence to turn the die that we are, the pattern of energy that we are, into a 6 and pair it with another 6 to get a double 6, which is the winning number within that probability field, well, That's to the extent we can be in service to life on its endless journey towards beauty, truth, and goodness, towards intelligence, towards a more beautiful, a more healing, a more fun and happy world.